Hello everyone, welcome to SoloWoo's channel. Today, we are exploring a question that looks simple but quickly becomes complicated. Do Hongkongers speak Chinese? Most people would assume the answer is yes. And in a sense, that's true. But the Chinese spoken on the streets of Hong Kong every day is not Mandarin, the official language of mainland China. It is Cantonese, a branch of Chinese that is older, more conservative, and full of tones and sounds that Mandarin lost centuries ago. That's why if you read Tang Dynasty poetry aloud, it often rhymes and flows more naturally in Cantonese than in Mandarin. So, while Hong Kongers do speak Chinese, what they speak is very different from the Mandarin most people in the world think of as Chinese. Cantonese is not limited to Hong Kong. It is also the daily language of Macau and much of Guangdong province, with around 80 million native speakers. At the overseas communities in Canada, the United States, and Australia, and the number approaches 100 million. That puts Cantonese in the same league as major European languages like German or French. Yet, despite its size, Cantonese is often called a dialect or Fangyin in official Chinese classification. Linguistically, though, it is not just an accent of Mandarin. It is its own language, distinct enough that a Mandarin speaker and a Cantonese speaker cannot understand each other without study. To understand why Mandarin became the national standard, we need to look back a century. For most of China's history, people across regions spoke languages so different that they were often incomprehensible to one another. What united them was writing. A scholar in the north and a merchant in the south might not converse easily, but they could both read the same text. After the Qing dynasty fell in 1911, reformers called for a national language to modernize China. Several options were considered. Cantonese had prestige thanks to its opera and literature. But Mandarin, particularly the northern variety around Beijing, had a crucial advantage. It was already widely used as a lingua franca across much of China. In 1932, Mandarin was declared the national language, and later, the People's Republic of China renamed it Putonghua, literally common speech. The state promoted it through schools, media, and official life until it became dominant nationwide. Cantonese, however, did not disappear. In Hong Kong, it flourished. Schools taught in Cantonese, pop music was recorded in Cantonese, and an entire film industry grew up around it. For Hong Kongers, Cantonese is more than just communication. It is identity and pride. Its sound system keeps features that Mandarin has lost, making it a kind of living museum of older Chinese speech. That's why poetry from 1,000 years ago still sounds closer to its original form in Cantonese than in Mandarin. For many Hong Kongers, the idea that Cantonese is merely a dialect feels dismissive. It is a full language, carrying centuries of history, and it continues to shape the daily life and identity of millions. So, how far apart are Cantonese and Mandarin really? Linguists measure this with mutual intelligibility tests. Between Mandarin and Cantonese, the result is close to zero. A speaker of one cannot follow the other without formal study. Compare this with Spanish and Portuguese, two Romance languages descended from Latin. Their written forms are almost 90% similar, which makes newspaper or books fairly easy to understand across the border. Spoken forms are trickier, with comprehension often around 50%, and Portuguese speakers usually understand Spanish more easily than the other way around. Even so, that is still far higher than Cantonese and Mandarin, where understanding is essentially non-existent for monolingual speakers. In fact, some linguists argue the gap is closer to Portuguese and French. which share about 75% similarity but sound very different in practice. Either way, the comparison shows just how far Cantonese and Mandarin have diverged. And Cantonese is not alone. Wu Chinese, including Shanghainese, has about 80 million speakers. Hokkien, Hakka, and other varieties each count in the millions too. Together, they form a web of languages within China, often called dialects, but functionally more like separate tongues. It's just like Europe, where Italian, French, and Spanish all grew from Latin but are now clearly distinct. This linguistic diversity is often hidden behind the label of a single Chinese language, but the reality is far more complex. Writing adds another dimension. In Hong Kong, people use traditional Chinese characters, the same system preserved in Taiwan and Macau. These characters keep the complexity of strokes passed down over centuries. In contrast, mainland China simplified many of these characters in the 1950s to make literacy easier. Strokes were reduced, variants were merged, and although a later round of reforms was withdrawn, the core changes stuck. Today, simplified Chinese is used in mainland China, Singapore, and Malaysia, while traditional Chinese continues in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and overseas communities. The difference is like British and American spelling. Color versus color, only multiplied across hundreds of characters. Readers can usually bridge the gap, but the visual style carries distinct cultural meaning in each place. Hong Kong's situation was unique because it remained under British colonial rule until 1997. While the mainland adopted simplified Chinese and promoted Putonghua, Hong Kong stayed separate. Schools continued teaching in Cantonese, and newspaper and official documents stuck with traditional Chinese characters. This colonial separation preserved Hong Kong's linguistic and cultural identity. That's why, even today, Cantonese and traditional Chinese remain the standard in Hong Kong, a living reminder of both its local heritage and its distinct historical path. Finally, greetings tell their own story. If you learned Mandarin, you probably memorized Ni Hao. But in Hong Kong, people rarely use it in everyday life. Not only is Ni Hao in Mandarin, it also sounds formal, almost like something from a textbook. Instead, locals often just say hi in English or wai, which is like hey, or simply call someone by name. This shows how Cantonese has its own rhythm and flavor, distinct from Mandarin and shaped by Hong Kong's unique history. So, do Hong Kongers speak Chinese? Yes, but it's complicated. They speak Cantonese, a language with deep roots, global reach, and a proud identity. It belongs to the Chinese family, but it stands firmly on its own. And if you ever meet someone from Hong Kong, remember, a simple hi or wai will feel much more natural than ni hao. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so many people can join the conversation.